Hey there YouTube, I'm Ikitsu, this is the Ikitsu Times. Welcome to my channel and welcome to a little bit of Sins of a Solar Empire 2. So today we're going to be looking at the Javelis LRM Cruiser for the Tech faction, and this is their long-range missile unit. This is the one that's supposed to just deal a lot of damage from a long distance there. And it's currently not in the best place compared to the other two, but it's still really quite good. The reason is that the Exoria got a bump in terms of its role, and the Canrack Assailant, in my opinion, is always a little bit better than either of those because it comes in an earlier tier before you can easily counter it. You can get a huge number of them, and they're cheaper because they're a frigate, so it's easier to sort of mass them. Still, in spite of that, the Javelis is still in a pretty good spot overall. I think that they're fine. Let's take a look at their statistics. 325 durability. This is actually a pretty good number. 1,075 armor points and 950 hull points. That's its total hit points. That's not very good. 125 antimatter, which is fine. They didn't used to have that at all, so I guess it's kind of nice that they've got it, I guess. And one medium missile at 20 damage per second with 400 pierce. Now, in spite of saying that they've got one medium missile, that's not really how this works. It fires in like a volley of 3. It used to fire volleys of 6, but they changed the way that they do it, where they fire instead now 3 missiles that have higher durability and have a faster firing rate. But the medium missile, it's not one medium missile. If it fired one missile, it would be way too easy to negate this with point defense. Why they have it set up the way they do, I have no idea. I think that it would probably be better if they said it had 3 medium missiles and then broke the damage down that way, but, you know, whatever. 20 damage per second with 400 pierce is pretty decent, though. That's definitely nothing to scoff at. So, hidden statistics, we're looking at 40 armor strength and a 750 maximum speed. So, this isn't the toughest one, and that's only because its hit points are not great. However, later on, you will be able to make it actually a pretty decently tough vehicle later on with upgrades. So, as far as use goes, in spite of the fact that this doesn't have 500 pierce, it's still doing 10 damage per second against capital ships, which is kind of the important thing to be able to hit with these guys. 10 damage per second against a capital ship for tech is pretty decent. The only thing that really competes with that without costing you exotic materials is the Caleb. And the Caleb doesn't upgrade quite as nicely and is still behind the Javelis, whereas the Javelis does upgrade up to 26 DPS and is, you know, a little bit better at base there. So 13 against capitals with fully upgraded Javelis. Much better option. Plus, you can get the additional 10% off of the aura from a capital ship that is sitting near them. The Javelis is just your go-to if you want to deal damage to those sort of vessels there. Against lighter vehicles, they're still pretty high damage. The output is actually still pretty good because their damage became more based on sustained damage rather than a big burst. So you're wasting a lot less damage with the Javelis per volley now if you overkill something. So while it's not good for you to be overkilling things with the Javelises, it's not anywhere near as bad as it used to be. And you do have access to retargeting with your missiles with the tech faction. So it's still possible for you to really be very efficient with the Javelis against lighter vehicles as well. Especially the heavy cruisers. The Javelis is very good at dealing damage to those with an extremely high damage per second value against those heavy cruisers. So their base values are quite good. They're quite durable. They're hard to hunt down with lighter ships. Very cost efficient for what they're doing 90% of the time. I think that these things are quite decent. The main flaw with this, of course, is that they do get countered by point defense. However, there are certain things that actually make this surprisingly difficult to defend against ship point defense wise. So in terms of cost, you're looking at 8 supply, which is pretty cheap for what you're getting. It costs 425 credits, 70 metal, and 100 crystal, which is, again, not that expensive. You can easily mass these things. The main problem with this is that you're going to be getting negated by point defense. You can sort of muscle your way through point defense if you have enough Javelises, so they're pretty okay at managing that sort of thing anyway. So let's take a look at your upgrades here. So there is a unique upgrade to the Javelis. It's the Breaker Missile. It has a cooldown of 30 seconds. You launch essentially an additional missile off of your cooldown timer. So this does also add to your damage per second output. And the missile itself doesn't really do that much damage. It's 75 damage at 500 pierce. If you're looking at the damage per second, you're looking at about 2.5 damage per second. As far as I know, this also does not upgrade. But what's good about this is that it's got 15 hull points and it's got 50 armor points. with, I believe, fairly decent armor strength. I don't know the actual number for it. But the nice thing about that is it takes a lot of point defense shots to kill a breaker missile. So what'll sort of happen is you'll have a volley or a couple breaker missiles out in the air, and what will happen is the point defense will get like caught on trying to kill the breaker missile, letting all your normal missiles through. Now, if the breaker missile itself hits, that's fantastic because it's 500 pierce, it's 75 damage. It's more damage than you're going to get out of your regular missile against a capital. However, the fact that you're letting through like an extra 10 of your normal missiles that would normally get point defensed makes the breaker missile really, really strong in the sense of like letting more damage through from other sources. So if you have a constant trickle of breaker missiles as well, if you've sort of staggered your firing times, you could pretty much make it so that your opponent is always getting caught on breaker missiles, destroying those, and losing a lot of their point defense potential against you as a result of that. The fact that it costs 75 antimatter does mean that you're going to run out of these pretty quickly, but they're a fantastic tool that makes it so that it's much harder to point defense against you. And it's sort of disproportionate. Like, you wouldn't think that this would make a huge difference, but it can make a pretty big difference in terms of your ability to actually block these things. For upgrade path for weapons, we're looking at the missile ones. Refined missile avionics. The problem with this is it starts at tier 3, which is pretty bad, and it only goes up to 30% there. This is still pretty decent, but it's nothing too special or spectacular. And you're getting it quite late compared to things like beams, plasma. If you're comparing it to the missiles for the Vasari, you're getting these upgrades at a lower rate, and they're capping out lower. So it's fine. There's nothing too wrong with it, but it's not great either. The other things that you can get, though, are the extended range missiles. This does matter a little bit for these guys. It pushes their range out to the point where they're like pretty hard to get to for certain types of enemies there, and they're capable of engaging some targets outside of the range. So extended range missiles makes it so that these things are quite decent for surviving in some fights that they might otherwise have a bit more difficulty in. Still, I do think that this isn't super important for them, generally speaking, because 15% of a very long distance, they're kind of out of range of most things, even without this, but in some fringe situations, I think they're quite good. The other one is armored missiles. This is the more important one. When you've got armored missiles, it makes it so that all of your missiles take longer to kill with point defenses. Now, this isn't going to make it so that point defense suddenly like becomes less effective against you. By this point in time, all the point defense ships in the game are going to have like the refined propellants on the Garda. You're going to have like the tier 3 lasers with the range extension on the Vigilis. Like, they're going to have their extra damage as well, and that's going to mean that they're going to be punching through your armor a little bit more easily and a little bit more quickly anyway. This just sort of helps compensate for that. So it brings you back to a point where your missiles were doing a little bit better in terms of not getting shot down by point defense, but it doesn't really make it so that your missiles are not getting shot down by point defense. They're not like that tough. Still, though, this is a very important sort of thing. Combine this with breaker missiles into the late game, and this is sort of how you would be able to punch through point defenses if your opponent is sort of building a lot of those, and you absolutely still want to be building your missiles. So you do have the option as tech to go for these very heavy missile builds that are not really being that are not really worried about the fact that your opponent is countering them with point defenses. Whereas I think with Vasari, if your opponent has gone for a very heavy flak build or a heavy defensive build that's designed to counter missiles, they can't really do as much to punch through that missile defense. The only thing they can really do is pick capitals that have heavy missiles and hope that those are capable of soaking up too much point defense and that all the other missiles make it through thanks to that. Whereas with tech, their Javelis does that by itself, and you can combine that with the Marza, and you can sort of combine that with the armored missile, making it so that your missiles can slip through even fairly beefy point defense nets. Even with all this, however, you are still going to have your damage reduced by point defenses, so it is still a good idea to think about what your opponent could be doing at any given time, and maybe consider taking other units instead, like the Caliph, if you're really getting countered and your opponent's really going heavy on that anti-missile defense. Because if you don't have any missiles, those things become a lot less useful. Now, armor becomes very important for these guys just because the ship is going to be a fairly high priority target. A lot of damage per second is coming out of these things against any kind of target. So making it so that they can survive a little bit longer, especially against lighter attacks, is going to be quite good there. Same thing for the hull reinforcements. You're going to go up to the fortified superstructure really consistently with these guys and be happy. The 5% from the expert damage control, again, that's more for capital ships, not for these guys. You are getting a little bit from the efficient generators and the potent reaction chaining. This means that you're going to be firing off more breaker missiles, which is really, really good for these guys. I think that that's a quite useful bonus for them. These things are a cruiser, and the Javelis, I mentioned before, they become quite tanky once you get later. The Javelis gets 1,000 hit points from the cruiser shield refit, which is higher than I think it probably should get, maybe. I actually think it should be swapped with the Hoshiko, but 1,000 extra hit points on top of what they've already got makes this fairly durable, capable of withstanding a pretty good amount of punishment from enemy ships there. For other things, you got the improved shield arrays, which are not really going to matter too much for it, and the superior shield emitters, which are very expensive for what you're getting. So those are kind of all the upgrades for the Javelis. I think that this thing is a really, really powerful ship in terms of what it can do. You just have to understand that because it's a very powerful ship that has a counter, you have to keep that counter in mind. And if you're not really capable of investing enough into using your Javelises, you might have to think about like combining it with ships that can hunt down enemy point defense ships. So if you're up against, say, the Advent, you would have to have a whole bunch of Harkas so that you can kill the Vigilises and easily get through those, and so that the Javelises could start firing. Or if you're up against Vasari, you have to have something that can kill a bunch of Wardens really quickly. Or if you're against Tech, you just need to have a whole bunch of Cobalt Light Frigates combined with these guys so that they can assassinate Gardas. If you're doing it that way, you can sort of like have your Javelises hopefully survive through the fight because they're tough. Even though they're not doing any damage, once enough point defenses start eroding and getting killed, that's when you start locking in with the missiles. And at that point in time, you're capable of hopefully killing all the heavier ships from the enemy side as well. You are going to be less efficient, though, until you've gotten rid of all those point defenses there, at which point you suddenly burst into being very effective. I think that that's a risky strategy, though. If your opponent is capable of like eliminating all of your Cobalts before they can do the job against your point defenses, then the Javelis remains useful, and suddenly you've just lost a whole bunch of money for nothing. Or your opponent could kill all the Javelises before their point defenses go down, and then once their point defenses do go down, they've eliminated your actual main damage dealer because now it's your Javelises, it's your Cobalt Light Frigates against maybe their Capitals or something like that, whatever they've got left over after that. So it's not always reliable to go for either strategy with these things. There's always risk associated with taking something like a Javelis. But that's kind of like what your cost is when you're taking something that's this powerful against this many targets. It's a very, very good ship all around there. And as a result, people do have to sort of think about countering it. One of the things that I hear is that the Javelis isn't particularly good because people can just take point defenses. But then you listen to people who play Advent talking about how the Vigilis is like trash tier, which I disagree with. But they'll talk about how like the Vigilis is garbage and they don't take them. And then you watch a multiplayer game where there's an Advent player who has no Vigilises, and then like a bunch of Javelises rock up and just instantly kill all their capital ships and they lose the game. And it's very confusing to me, because clearly if they had some Vigilises there, they would have survived, because I know for a fact that the Vigilis is very good at blocking Javelises. But they insist that the Vigilis is a bad ship, so they refuse to take it, and then they just died to Javelises. So it's very perplexing to me. I don't really get the community, but that is something I see fairly consistently there. In terms of civilian research, this is something that you really do want. Things like counter deployment, things like labor negotiations, industrial complex, and industrial juggernaut. The reason it's so important is, again, having mass for Javelises really matters. Being able to bully your way past point defenses, make it so that you can at least deal some damage, is really, really vital for a ship like this there. And even if you can't really do that, or you don't need to do that, having these things like in large numbers makes it so they can burst down enemy ships very quickly. That's typically what you want from these kinds of damage dealer type ships there. Now, for other things, you're looking at familiar territory, you're looking at navigation subchannels. Those sort of bonuses do matter for the Javelis, but not tremendously. It's not a hugely slow ship, so being able to get that maximum speed boost is better. But it is primarily, in my opinion, useful for the Javelis for keeping up with capital ships that are sort of trying to retreat. It makes it a little bit easier for the Javelis sort of to keep pace with them and keep firing missiles at them, preventing them from getting away out of a gravity well without being killed. So they're capable of keeping up a little bit more easily with that upgrade against other ships like cruisers and stuff like that as well. So that's kind of everything about the Javelis. I think that's really powerful, and I think that having a whole bunch of these things is going to win you a bunch of fights. But it's definitely got some situations where you're going to have to think long and hard about whether or not you want to keep leaning into them and whether or not you want to switch to a different ship out there. I do think that this is probably best used against Advent under normal circumstances, just because like you can sort of get enough of these things to overwhelm a small number of Vigilises pretty easily. And they usually are not going to be going for like mass Vigilises against you in the later game, but if they are going for that, then yeah, you're in a lot of trouble with these guys. So it really depends. I think that the Javelis can be used against all three factions pretty effectively, but I would definitely would lean into the Caleb's against another tech player, for example, most of the time. Or I would potentially I'd say that the Javelis is still probably better against Visari. I would probably use the Javelis most times against Visari rather than the Caleb. It's hard to say, though, for sure. But in any event, that is going to be everything for today. Hope you found this one enjoyable. And of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.